What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Michael Mann's Ferrari, which I just saw at a press screening at the New York Film Festival. It's actually the last day of the festival, and it's been absolutely incredible. But this movie's not coming out in the United States until December 25th, so not to worry. There'll be no spoilers in my review, but it's weird when you're talking about a biopic about a famous individual because all this stuff is a matter of historic records. So I won't be spoiling any, key moments or key scenes or big surprises. But in case you're unfamiliar with the premise of the movie, it stars Adam Driver as Enzo Ferrari, the Italian founder of the car manufacturer Ferrari, and the movie is specifically based on the 1991 biography Enzo Ferrari, The Man and the Machine by motorsport journalist Brock Yates. But in addition to Adam Driver, the film also stars Penélope Cruz and Shailene Woodley, and also Patrick Dempsey in a kind of a small but memorable role, because I didn't know this until the press conference, but apparently Patrick Dempsey is a real-life racing enthusiast and has competed in Le Mans, things like that. But one crucial detail that set this screening apart from the rest of the screenings at the New York Film Festival, we actually had some movie stars in attendance because this film is financed independently outside of the AMPTP. They really need to come up with a new name for that. But because it was financed outside of the AMPTP, it's technically not being struck or not being picketed by SAG-AFTRA right now. So Adam Driver and Penelope Cruz, they could talk all day long about this movie at both this festival as well as at the Venice International Film Festival. But the most special part about seeing Ferrari with Michael Mann in attendance is just knowing that this 80-year-old filmmaker, he finally got his big passion project onto the screen. He'd been working on this movie and thinking about this movie for a long time. He's an absolute car nut. And I think one of the big obstacles was the film Ford v. Ferrari, directed by James Mangold, which came out a couple years ago, because anytime you have a big Ferrari film, even though that was more of a Ford film than a Ferrari film, but obviously it's going to be hard to make your project seem fresh and distinctive and original. But what makes this movie, I guess, stand alone in terms of its story, what sets this particular film apart is that it focuses on a very specific time in Enzo Ferrari's life. And here's the official kind of synopsis from IMDb. Set in the summer of 1957, with Enzo Ferrari's auto empire in crisis, the ex-racer turned entrepreneur pushes himself and his drivers to the edge as they launch into the Mille Miglia, a treacherous 1,000-mile race across Italy. And the good news is, whether you've been following Michael Mann's movies for decades or you're brand new to his work, I think this is Michael Mann's best feature film in close to 20 years. If I'm looking at a list of all of his movies right now, because going into this I was wondering, will it force me to rearrange my top 10 or will it be dead last? I think he's got either 14 features or 15 features. It depends upon how you count some of his TV work, because he did make one TV feature film, The Jericho Mile, but he's also got some pilots for some TV shows. But if you include Jericho Mile but throw out the TV shows, I think he's got 14 features. I think Ferrari ranks behind Ali, but ahead of Miami Vice. I think the feature films that are worse than Ferrari would be Miami Vice, LA Takedown, even though I love LA Takedown, but that obviously was just like a first pass getting prepared for Heat. But I think it's better than Public Enemies. I think it's better than The Keep, and I think it's better than Black Hat. But it's not enough to rearrange my top 5 of my favorite movies by him. I think Collateral, The Insider, Thief, Heat, and Last of the Mohicans are my 5 favorite, with Manhunter, The Jericho Mile, and Ali kind of all competing for that number 6 slot. And I knew going into this movie that we were going to get the chance to feast upon some truly elegant and gorgeous and just epic racing sequences throughout the Italian countryside. But my big question ahead of time was this going to be another House of Gucci, where you have a lot of people speaking in Italian accents, but not in Italian, where it just comes across as kind of comical? Because I feel like when you're making a movie in a particular setting, you have to make a decision. Are we going to do it in English for kind of the international commercial viability? Are we going to shoot it in its native language? Or are we going to shoot it in English but use accents that are more or less kind of sort of appropriate to that region? And there's no clear-cut answer in terms of what's the best route to go. And having now seen the movie, I'll say that the accents are mixed. I don't think people are going to be ridiculing this movie the way they did House of Gucci a few years ago, but I would have preferred just to see all these actors just speak in their natural accent. Like when you watch a movie like Amadeus takes place in Austria in the 1800s, and you've got actors from all over the world playing Germans and Italians, and it's just a who's who of different actors, but they all just use their natural accents, including a lot of Americans. And maybe it makes it less authentic, or it ruins some of the verisimilitude. But no one complains about the accents in Amadeus, even though none of the accents match. But with this movie, there are a couple performances where I feel like the actors are stumbling over the accent, where they never quite found a way to like get around the accent, where they can focus on the emotions of the character. And that is a little distracting. Like Shailene Woodley is absolutely stunningly beautiful, but she's kind of sort of trying to do an accent, but trying to do it in a subtle way where I never stopped like focusing on the accent instead of actually just trying to engage with the character. Adam Driver pulls it off a little more. Initially, for like the first 20, 30 minutes, I was like, dude, just talk like Adam Driver and just say you're Enzo Ferrari, and we will ride along with you no matter what you decide to do. But I stopped noticing his accent about like 20, 30 minutes into the movie. So I'm still not convinced that doing an accent was necessarily the right creative choice. But I do think that is going to be a stumbling block for some audience members when they hear the clashing accents, because you have actors from Italy, you have actors from Spain, you have actors from America. And so it's just kind of a mess. So in that, I've already acknowledged that Ferrari is not going to force me to rearrange my top 5 favorite Michael Mann movies. Let's talk about the good qualities and the bad qualities. And if you're a young film lover or a young film fan, you might not even be aware that Michael Mann, once upon a time, was considered one of the major American directors. I feel like in the 90s, that's when he really found his stride, where between Last of the Mohicans, Heat, and The Insider, suddenly people realized, oh shit, like you're one of the great American directors. Like you can do no wrong. Like, you basically had like the best and brightest actors in the world lining up to work with Michael Mann, hoping and praying that they would get a chance to star in one of his movies. But admittedly, the 21st century has been kind of a mixed bag in terms of his overall output. Like I really like Collateral. I really like the pilot for that show Luck. But he's made a lot of stinkers or clunkers or uneven, inconsistent movies in the 21st century. So it's nice just to see him back on firm footing, even if I do feel like Ferrari does have a few flaws. Also, I should acknowledge before I go any further, I know less than nothing about cars. Like when people start talking about intake manifolds and things like that, I'm like, oh shit. Like, y'all are about to leave me 1,000 miles behind because I have no idea what y'all are talking about. And it helps that this movie has scenes where Enzo Ferrari is explaining how an engine works to a young child, so that you can kind of get like, basically, like what are the physics involved? What is the engineering involved to generate power? And power is everything, but obviously precision engineering is helpful as well, because you see just how dangerous this sport is. This takes place in the late 50s, where these race cars, they're basically like little hot dogs with wheels blasting along, where like the driver, they have goggles on, but no seatbelt, no helmet, no nothing. They're going balls through the wall at like 120 miles an hour for 1,000 miles. So yeah, inevitably shit is going to happen. And apparently the conventional wisdom at the time was, if you're in a horrible accident, it's better to be thrown clear from the wreckage instead of being trapped in the car with a seatbelt. And as we see time and time again throughout this movie, when people are thrown from the vehicle, I mean, it's like they're fucking rag dolls, like somersaulting through the air. And whenever they collide with trees, fences, road, whatever, I mean, drivers get absolutely torn to pieces in this. It's a terrifying sport. I don't even know if it is a sport. It's described in the movie very aptly as a terrible passion, where this is a passion that is all-consuming for everybody involved in the sport. They kind of have no choice but to engage with it. But it's a terrible burden to carry. And obviously the word terrible has kind of evolved over time. Like once upon a time, like J.R.R. Tolkien would say, oh, it's a terrible individual. It meant like they were like grand and powerful. And I feel like they're using a more old-fashioned version of terrible, where it's like this huge, epic, overwhelming burden, as well as a source of like joy and pleasure that these engineers and drivers all suffer from. And this is one of those movies that really tries to get to the root of like, what are the key drivers for success? Like if you're a driver in this sport, are you a competitor? Or are you a sportsman? Because there are a lot of gentlemen of leisure who enjoy driving cars really, really quickly. They enjoy dressing in a stylish fashion with like their hair, well groomed, with a beautiful woman at their side, and they enjoy the kind of the more superficial, stylish aspects of the sport. And then there are the people who just have this like awful gnawing emptiness in their belly, where all they live for is to defeat the person that's to their left or to their right or in front of them. They have to win because they have no other choice. And that is the persona of Enzo Ferrari. And I think Adam Driver does a great job, in spite of the fact that I found the accent to be kind of hit or miss at times, because the emotional intensity is there. And Adam Driver at this point, I think he's one of the best and brightest actors of his generation. I think he's close to 40 now. But if you look at the directors he's worked with over the last like 10 or 12 years, it's just awe-inspiring. Like he has systematically hunted down the best directors in the world. I was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to work with all of them. So I've got Adam Driver's IMDb profile open, and here's a list of some of the directors that he's worked with going back to 2011, where he worked with Clint Eastwood. Scrolling up, he worked with Steven Spielberg on Lincoln. He worked with the Coen brothers on Inside Llewyn Davis. He worked with, we'll skip all the Star Wars bullshit. He worked with Jim Jarmusch on Patterson. He worked with Scorsese on Silence. I mean, Jesus Christ. He worked with Soderbergh on Logan Lucky. He worked with Spike Lee on Black Klansman. He worked with Terry Gilliam on The Man Who Killed Don Quixote. He worked with Noah Baumbach. We're not going to include Noah Baumbach in this company. He's not on that level. And he worked with Ridley Scott on The Last Duel. So it's like, good God, man. Like, I mean, are there any great directors left that are on your to-do list? Like, I would love to sit down with Adam Driver and just find out, like, who are his all-time favorite filmmakers that are active today, that are actually still making movies? Who's still left on the list that he would like to work with? Like Paul Verhoeven, can we maybe hope they might bump into each other at some point? And what I loved about Adam Driver's performance is how he does an amazing job of seeming calm, cool, and collected, even when his personal life and his professional life is just fucking insane. He's juggling 2 families, which is enough stress just to kill about anybody. Ferrari has financial problems. Basically, he's a guy who runs his company so that he can design cars for racing. Racing is what drives him. Other companies, like some of his competitors, they indulge in racing, or they compete in racing so they can kind of expose their brand to the outside world so they can sell more cars. And so he's got a very different way of looking at things. Like, he only needs to sell just enough cars, kind of keep his doors open so that he can continue to work with his engineers designing better and better cars. And I just love watching entrepreneurs and businessmen and people of vision that are completely, totally focused on what they're doing. And there's a scene in the movie, which I think is the best scene in the movie, where he sits his drivers down and he basically explains his competitive philosophy and how if you're going around a turn, there's one line that is the most economical, like most efficient line that you can follow to take that turn at that speed. And there's not room for more than one driver. And so he's basically saying, look, let the other guy make a mistake. Let the other guy chicken out. Like, do not surrender your position on that line, no matter how much of a gentleman or a sportsman you might want to be. But that's easy to say when you're dealing with drivers where they've kind of accepted that death is a part of their occupation. But where it gets more complicated is when these cars are racing through cities, when there are people like close in, standing on either side watching the cars go by, and you might want to say, well, shit, like, why are those people standing so close? But I mean, it's incredible seeing how, like, opera, soccer, and racing are such a huge part of Italian culture at this point in this movie. And Michael Mann does a great job of showing how all those worlds kind of overlap and intersect and influence one another. But this is an absolute crowd sport. And when the cars really cut loose, you basically get like a great like visual orgasm while watching some of these scenes, because the cars are just beautiful. They had to reconstruct a lot of these cars from scratch. I think a lot of them just don't even exist anymore. But you've got multiple Ferraris, and you've got multiple Maseratis. You've got multiple, but like Ferrari's got like a couple different models all in the race, and so it's like you're watching these. Like, a great looking car is like a great looking work of art, but it's a great looking work of art with a lot of like with a combustion engine that allows it to go well over 100 miles an hour. But it's just stunning seeing like the Italian landscape, and Michael Mann knows how to use like really smooth, elegant camera shots, whereas a lot of other filmmakers would do like really gnarly like shaky cam, and like you wouldn't be able to appreciate the action at all. Michael Mann wants you to be able to appreciate all the action, and more importantly, he wants you to understand the geography so that when the cars come in for like a really tight corner and they're all fighting for that line, he wants you to be able to understand precisely what's happening when a driver does something amazing, or if a driver makes a mistake and horrible things happen. And when it comes to watching racing scenes on film, I much prefer to watch a movie like Ferrari than something like Days of Thunder, where people are just driving around in circles. I know people who follow NASCAR hate it when people describe it that way, but the idea of watching people driving around in circles has zero appeal to me whatsoever. Even though I do like Days of Thunder, I've seen it a lot of times as this great trashy fun, but I much prefer to watch people racing on rough country roads where like animals and children and rocks and like natural obstacles. That's what's one of the most terrifying things. Like, someone could like throw an ice cream cone like without even thinking about it not realizing that a car's going to come around like an hour later and have to deal with that obstacle. And if you want to measure the success of a movie by the amount of emotional investment you have in the characters in the story, about 2/3 of the way through, I realized like there were several drivers that I was getting emotionally invested in, and a lot of good comedy throughout. Like at one point, there's a driver who needs a little motivation, and Enzo just tells him like, "Look, if you don't win this race, your children and your wife will never talk to you again." And he says it with such a straight face. Like, racing is everything to these people. There's no such thing as second place. I guess they've been watching Talladega Nights where, like, if you're not first, you're last. But that is absolutely the philosophy that Enzo Ferrari has. So I guess the most important question is not how well this movie compares to other Michael Mann movies, but how well it compares to other classic racing movies. I mean, going back to like the early 30s with like The Crowd Roar starring James Cagney, people have been making racing movies. And I'm sure there are earlier examples than that. Like, what are the essential racing movies? I really did enjoy Ford v Ferrari. I saw it twice in the theater. But what are the good ones, like the essentials? Like, not Talladega Nights, even though I do enjoy that. That one's funny. Steve McQueen's Le Mans is a very impressive achievement, but totally devoid of any sort of emotion or story. If you just want to see great racing, watch Le Mans, but it doesn't have much more than that to offer. You got Grand Prix from the late 60s, which is worth a look. You've got the Howard Hawks movie, Redline 7000, but I think Howard Hawks made much better movies than Redline 7000. So yeah, it's tough to make a good racing movie. One of the only real flaws with Ferrari for me was that it doesn't have much of an ending. It stops very abruptly. So abruptly, I was like, what? And suddenly I found myself reading, title cards, like giving me information. And I wasn't that frustrated because I knew that in like a few short moments, so Michael Mann and Adam Driver and Penelope Cruz were going to walk onto the stage, which was very exciting. I mean, Penelope Cruz, I've had a fucking like crush on her since like the late 90s, and suddenly I'm like sitting like 5 feet from her. I'm like, you are an absolute goddess. Like when you see a legit movie star in the flesh, for me at least, it does kind of take your breath away, especially when it's a very glamorous, very beautiful movie star. It's different from seeing a politician or an athlete or like a famous tech entrepreneur or whatever the case might be. Like, even though I'm very much in awe of a figure like Michael Mann and his accomplishments, there's no denying the physical beauty of a movie star like Penelope Cruz. So that was a huge thrill. But the ending, I wouldn't have minded a better ending. Like after you watch a movie like Heat, which has one of the best endings imaginable, where you've got Al Pacino holding Robert De Niro's hand as that Moby score swells in that classic shot from behind. You're like, all right, that is an ending. Like, that is a fucking movie. And the music continues to swell as the credits begin. Heat has a really good ending. Last of the Mohicans has an absolutely phenomenal ending. Ferrari does not. But there was one funny bit from the press conference afterwards where people were talking about, like, to what degree do the characters need to have like expertise in their craft to be in a Michael Mann movie? Because famously, James Caan had to learn how to crack open safes to be in Thief. And so Michael Mann, basically, he looked down at his cast and was like, yeah, so I had to train James Caan to crack open safes. And he says, yeah, and Adam Driver and Penelope Cruz, they are ready to run a car company. And all the actors laughed. It was a great little, there was a great sense of camaraderie between everybody on stage. But I'm looking at my notes, and there's not much more I can say without going into serious spoilers. But I do hope that Michael Mann will get a chance to make his announced follow-up film, which is, I'm not going to pull it down. It's going to yank it down from the shelf, but Heat 2. And some people might be rightly asking, like, how the hell do you make Heat 2? Like, some of the actors are no longer with us, or they're in advanced years, and I think he would just recast everybody. And I don't know if people would like accept that or not, but at a minimum, read Heat 2. I'm not going to claim that the entire book is as entertaining as watching Heat, but like the first third and the last third, you'll be like, holy crap, it is a riveting reading experience. Where you'll have to like hold your hand down to prevent yourself from flipping the pages too quickly, like you're trying to figure out what's going to happen, but slow down, savor the experience. So even if he doesn't get a chance to make that movie, once again, Michael Mann is 80. There are not a lot of filmmakers who are active in their 80s. I mean, Scorsese, Ridley Scott, it's a very short list, and there are not that many filmmakers left who got their filmmaking career started in the 70s that are still making movies at a very large scale. Michael Mann's one of the final people left. And of course, you can go, well, Clint Eastwood's still active. He started acting in the fucking late 50s. There's only one Clint Eastwood. I don't know how much longer Michael Mann will remain active, but if this turns out to be his last movie, at least his last movie is not Black Cat. I've seen Black Cat twice. I liked it better the second time through, but Black Cat's a pretty uneven, unsatisfying experience. It has great scenes, but I think overall it's an unsatisfying movie, especially if it was going to be the last movie directed by Michael Mann. So it no longer has that distinction. So if his career winds to a close after Ferrari, I can live with that because he's got so many good movies to his name. Like I said earlier, Last of the Mohicans is my number 1, and then Heat number 2, Thief number 3, The Insider number 4, and Collateral number 5. I think all 5 of those movies would have a good chance of turning you into a Michael Mann fan if you're not already a self-proclaimed enthusiast for his work. Also, I should acknowledge my bias when it comes to The Last of the Mohicans, because I was living in North Carolina at the time when the movie was shot there, and people just lost their goddamn minds. I mean, it helps the movie might be the best historical epic of the last 50 years. I mean, it's fucking incredible, but just we would all go hiking, like where the movie was shot and that sort of thing. It's just a movie that's very near and dear to the hearts of a lot of people who live in that state. And as I talk, I'm starting to realize what I need to do is a top 10 Michael Mann video. I've done a lot of top 10 lists for different filmmakers, and with Scorsese releasing a movie next week, David Fincher releasing a movie the following week, Ridley Scott releasing a movie in November, and what else is coming in December? But anyway, all those directors deserve top 10 videos. I've actually already done a top 10 video for Scorsese, but Fincher, Scott, Michael Mann, I need to do top 10 videos for all of them, or at a minimum, at least live stream discussions of their work. But I'm rambling at this point. Time to wrap the sucker up. If you enjoyed this video, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. Hope everybody has a great weekend, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.